Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan Axelrod, editor of Culture, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's presentation all about one of my very favorite cheeses, Comté. Leading us will be Jean-Louis Carbonnier, who represents Conte PDO in the US. Since we haven't been able to be together in person, hopefully very soon, Culture has stepped into the breach with these events to connect cheesemakers and others in the industry. You can use the Q&A functions for your questions. We will be answering most of them during a dedicated Q&A time at the end of the hour. And be sure to stay with us until the very end to be entered into a raffle to win a copy of Harold McGee's latest book, Nosedive, A Field Guide to the World's Smells. So Jean-Louis will get things started. And then we're going to see a charming video, short video, with two farmers, the Michaud brothers, who operate one of the small dairy farms that are at the heart of making Comté. Jean-Louis, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Suzanne. It's a pleasure to be with everybody today. And of course, it's even a greater pleasure to talk about Comté, one of the greatest cheeses around. So just a little bit of housekeeping. I think everybody's received a box with two cheese samples in them. They are Comtés. They are labeled 1 and 2. So we'll let you taste them and take your comments later on. There's also a plastic envelope with information materials. And in particular, I'd like to attract your attention to the document called It's Time to Savor Comté here, as it contains a wheel of aromas that explains more about the aromas that we encounter in Comté. So that may be useful for you if you want to look at it, use it to prepare some serious tasting notes. Finally, I would like to encourage you, if you haven't done it, to unwrap the Comtés that you have. The temperature of tasting is very important. So I hope you have unwrapped them and let them come to a cool temperature, not exactly room temperature. I also hope you have opened some beer or some wine as we suggested for the pairings. So having said that, I think we can go on, Suzanne.
I'm going to be tasting right along with you. I have my cheeses ready to go here and my glass of unoaked Chardonnay to taste along with you. So, and did we see the cheeses? I'm not sure. I think I might not have been. There we go. So now we're going to watch the video about the Michaud brothers, and be sure to pay attention to how they clean the cow's udders. And Jean-Louis is going to talk about this later. It's really fascinating. Ready for
Hi everybody on Heritage Radio Network. We are here to talk about Conte cheese. My name is Anaël and I'm Quentin. We are two French farmers and we produce milk for the Conte cheese. So this is our farm. And during summer, we milk cow on the mountain pasture, so we will see that. So welcome to Le Cernois, our mountain pasture. So we have 44 hectares, and in our farm we have close to 50 cows. So every summer we milk cows in the mountain pasture. So here all is organic. Our farm is organic. We choose to produce organic milk for the Comté cheese, but not all the Comté is organic. So for the Comté cheese, you can use only Montbéliard and Simmental. We have both. For 35 Montbéliard and 15 Simmental. And we choose Simmental because it's more rustic. So in a few minutes, we will go to bring the cow for the milking.
are on our milking station.
So we milk the cow here every day. We milk 2 times per day, on the morning and in the afternoon. So we milk at 7 a.m. in the morning and 5 p.m. during the afternoon. For the Conte cheese, you have to milk the cow 2 times per day, every day. And the milk is collected by the cheesemaker every night.
This is a typical French prenatal. To prepare clothes, I use wood. It's organic.
So it protects biodiversity for milk, and it's special for the taste of the Comté cheese. Now it's finished to milk, and the cow go back to eat.
So now it's finished for today. Thank you very much for your attention.
And if you want more information about Comté cheese, you can come. Our door is open, and all the Cernois you can visit every day. See you.
See you.
Well, I'm going to take it from here with a presentation about Conte and trying to cover as many things as possible and point out the key element. So first key element is how the name is pronounced. It's Comté. So now that we have that down, we can carry on to the next slide. And a little bit of a history about Conte, the cheese, and the PDO Comté. Conte itself has a very long history, going back 800, 900 years. The first written mentions go back to the 13th century, but it wasn't yet called Comté. The expression Comté appears in the 1880s in the name Gruyère de Comté. Comté refers to the area where it is produced. The word Gruyère refers really to a certain type of cheese, and there are many different expressions of that cheese in Switzerland and in France. In 1958, the AOC designation for Gruyère de Comté happens. AOC meaning Appellation d'origine contrôlée. So that's 1958. At the same time, other appellations are created for other forms of Gruyère, such as Gruyère d'abondance, for example. As time passes, the reputation and the renown of Comté establishes itself on its own, and in 1986, the term Gruyère is dropped, and Comté is the name of our appellation. This is further enshrined in 1992 when Comté obtains PDO status, which replaces AOC designation. The PDO logo is now used in lieu of the AOC logo for all cheese AOCs. Like all PDOs, Comté has a governing body, and we'll look at this momentarily. Next. So very importantly, a PDO defines a specific area of production, whether it is cheese or wine. So for Comté, the area of production is the Jura Massif of France, and only a specific cheese made in that area can receive the name of Comté, providing it follows what we call a set of specifications, a cahier des charges in French, that encompasses all the details about the production. PDO, the Conte PDO has a twofold mission, as you can read, one towards the consumers in terms of meeting consumers' expectations at different levels, but also a mission towards the milk producers, the cheesemakers, and the affineurs of the region. This is an area with a difficult climate, a difficult landscape, a semi-mountainous area, and this organization has allowed everybody to continue preserve a certain lifestyle. It has allowed farms to continue, and it has also allowed the work in the Comté sector to remain attractive to new people. Next slide. So quickly, here, a little bit of geography. The Massif du Jura is in the eastern part of France, and it follows the border with Switzerland for about 200 miles from north to south, but it's a relatively narrow band. All the red points that you see in the map are farms where Comté milk is produced. Next slide. So the elevation in the Jura Massif is anywhere between 650 and 5,000 feet. It's a fairly rugged region, one of the coldest in France. In fact, the area near Saint-Claude on the map has for a long time held the record for the coldest temperature in France in winter. Next slide. Now, I'd like to walk you through the different parts of the Comté PDO chain. As we said, a specific production area, milk producers, cooperatives, also called fruitières, and affineurs. Next slide. So first of all, very importantly, now that we have established the specific area of production, and this is not arbitrary, of course, this is the area where Comté has existed for centuries. So first and foremost, the milk. And milk is used raw in the making of Comté. This is crucial to the intrinsic quality of the milk and also to the transformation of the milk into cheese. Now, when we say raw milk, it's more than raw milk, as we'll say as we go on. The cows that are used are limited to two breeds, the Montbéliard and Simmental. They have to graze outside from spring to autumn, and in the winter, they eat hay that has been harvested in the area by the farmers. Next. Milking has to be performed twice a day. There is also no self-milking robots allowed in the region. Again, this has to do with all the efforts to preserve the quality of the milk and especially the quality of the microflora, while at the same time being able to control the hygiene and the practices that are required to maintain safety in the Comté sector. But the word microflora is truly key to our discussion, hence the expression of lait vivant, milk that's alive, because raw milk can be stripped of most of its microflora by filtering and other processes. So the key is to have milk that is rich in microflora that will not only carry elements of the original terroirs where the cows graze, but also microflora that the cows carry on their skins, especially on their udder, the microflora from the milking parlors, etc. And all these microflora through the cheese making and then through the aging will progressively express itself and play a big part in the development of the Comté aromas. Next slide. Now the next step is the fruitière. This is where Comté is made every day. So the milk is brought to the fruitière every day. Along the way, controls are carried out about the quality of the milk. But what's very important here for Comté is that the farmers pool their milk together. This is what has allowed them to create this large cheese of about 80 pounds. Next. The cheese making, equally important, but you cannot make a good cheese if you don't have good milk. So the cheesemaker's role is to transform the milk into cheese, but at the same time, to preserve the microflora of the cheese, to preserve the character, the intrinsic qualities of the cheese. And the cheesemaker has to adapt to the milk every day due to the fact that milk, you know, varies a little bit every day, depending on the weather, depending on the season, depending on the temperature, and so on. Next, please. The third profession, if you will, is the profession of affineur and the work of affinage in the cellars. So the wheels of Comté, or I should say the future wheels of Comté, because the wheels that you see on the left of the picture are called white cheese, essentially. They're not yet Comté. These wheels will be brought into the cellars. They'll be organized, sorted, prepared according to the fruitière of origin, but also according to the potential of each of the wheels. Next, please. So affinage requires a lot of skills, really, in order to follow, to monitor the wheels very precisely, because the affineur wants to make the best of each and every wheel that they have. And that means monitor the potential, monitor the development inside the cheese, you know, making sure that if they perceive a little bit of a crack developing, which is a sign of maturity, well, now this cheese has to go to market, and so on. But similarly, certain cheeses will be kept for almost 3 years in some instances, and only very few cheeses have that kind of a potential. Next. A few words now about Comté, its environment and its economy, because at the end of the day, this concept of PDO is absolutely more than defining a terroir, than establishing rules, preserving traditions, which already is a big deal. But it's also about maintaining landscapes. It's also maintaining biodiversity that's integral to the quality of the product. As you remember, one of the commitments of the Comté sector is to deliver a cheese of the highest quality that is crafted in the best possible environment. Next, please. So altogether, Comté provides about 14,000 jobs in the Jura region. And again, what's key is that thanks to this organization of everyone involved in producing Comté, they are able, all of these people are able to sell a cheese that command a good price, and everyone benefits from the price of Comté. The value that is accrued from the milk to the finished cheese that is sold in the market, that all that added value is essentially shared between the farmers, the cheesemakers, and the affineur in a way that everybody gets a decent return for their efforts. And that is, you know, that is a concept that's truly integral to Comté's PDO, that there is a strong element of solidarity, so much so that we see young people interested in farming in the Comté area. We see people from other regions coming to farm in the Comté region as well, because they recognize that this model will guarantee them a good living. Whereas, as you know, no doubt, in many areas, milk farming is essentially the production of a commodity whose price is not controlled by the farmer. And it's a situation that's extremely challenging for farmers all around the world, whether it's in New York State or in Brittany in France. Next slide, please. So, of course, the next step after all this is the cheese counter. So a part of our role here in the US for Denise and myself is to visit cheese stores, cheese corners, to find out where Comté is and where Comté is not. So the presentation and I would say the presentation and the presence of Comté is very important to us, especially in the key cheese stores and key boutiques where it's really showed at its best for the benefit of an appreciative clientele. Next slide. So in the cheese counter, the presentation varies, but you must keep in mind as a cheese professional that Comté remains a well-kept secret here in America. Even though it is enjoyed by many people in France, it remains a well-kept secret here. And I think it's your role, if you enjoy it, to also introduce customers to Comté. Comté lends itself also to many fun pairings, whether it is with white wine, as we have here, or beer, especially lighter beer like wheat beers. And I hope you found something that was of interest for a pairing yourself. But, you know, Comté, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, next slide. But Comté is a cheese that can be enjoyed in many different ways, you know, in different forms of pairings. And as we show here in this picture, in different situations, whether it is on the cheese board with a variety of other cheeses, whether it is in sandwiches. Next slide, please. You know, whether it is simply with a glass of wine, but it can also be enjoyed and cooked with very easily. Yep, next slide. So now I would like to go into the tasting of Comté. I think cutting Comté, you probably know how to do that. But what's very important when one cuts Comté is that every piece that's cut has a little bit of the Comté crust on it. That's very important because the Comté crust allows a customer to recognize the cheese, but also the Comté crust has to be used along with the rest of the cheese. So for the purpose of our tasting Comté is very much like tasting a wine or tasting beer or tasting just about anything. It really starts with looking at the color of the cheese, looking at its texture. In fact, when you visit an affinage cellar, very often, I'll try to show that to you here, but you know, the cheese, the affinage master, if you will, with their plug, extract a piece of Comté a little bit like this, except of course it's round. But the goal, one of the elements, is to see what the texture is like. You know, how supple is it, or how does it break easily? And you know, for our purpose of tasting, this is something that's also interesting in the sense that it tells you about the age of Comté. Younger Comté tend to be much more supple, whereas older Comté will break more easily. So this is one aspect of the tasting that really relates to some aspects of the texture. The color, I think with the two Comtés we have, when you look at them, you can see that they're fairly pale in color. Do you think, maybe I can ask you that question, if do you have a sense that one of them seems paler than the other to you, or one of them more yellow than the other? Any feedback on this, or maybe something we can look at later on? But another aspect of the piece of Comté that we have has to do with the crust, you know, and how much of a crust area we have, if you will, you know, from the crust going into the cheese.
Jean-Louis?
Yep.
We do have Jason, who is responding that number 1 is slightly paler, but they're remarkably similar. And then Terry says that 1 is yellower. And we also have some other folks saying that number 1 is definitely the lighter one of the 2.
Okay.
I do have a question for you. Going back to when you talked about robotic milking.
Yeah.
Michelle wants to know, how might automated or robotic milking compromise the microflora of the milk? She uses as an example that Rogue Creamery in the United States uses robots and makes world-class cheese with raw milk. So she's just wondering what the difference is there.
Well, I wish you had not mentioned any cheese in particular, because you know, the question of robots has been thoroughly investigated in the case of Comté. You know, the PDO is not adverse to technological progress, but all the studies that have been carried out that have to do with robots are problematic for several reasons. One is that typically when robots are used, it's a form of self-service, and the cows just go and be milked whenever they want, whether it's 2 or 3 times a day. There are issues that have to do with cleanliness. Since the robots are not exactly monitored, things can happen where a cow, for example, that is not healthy can go and have her milk drawn by the robot. One of the key elements with Comté and why robots have been rejected is that there's the sense that the farmer has a huge part to play, and one of these parts has to do with when the farmer milks the cows. If you probably noticed in the video that the farmers we saw draw a little bit of milk before they attach the milking claws to the udder of the cow. And by doing this, they have the opportunity, which a robot cannot do, certainly at this point in the technologies. The farmer can see whether the milk looks good, or whether the cow might be a problem that would provide the milk that would be damaging to the quality of the overall milk and the cheese. There might be pathogens. And the role of the farmer is precisely to have that contact with the cow and with the milk. Remember also one thing that I said earlier, raw milk. Which raw milk? What kind of raw milk is it? You know, if the raw milk is going to be entirely filtered, you know, raw or not raw doesn't make that much difference. And this is one thing that I would say people have been, I would say, how would you say, people have been astonished by when we talk about Comté and about the practices in the milking parlor, is the fact that there is no cleaning of the teats of the cow. It's a very light scrub with the wood wool that you saw in the video, but there is no disinfectant whatsoever that can be added. Again, the idea is that the milk, when it comes out of the udder, can capture as much of the microflora that's on the cow or ambient in the milking parlor. This milk will never be filtered. This is the milk that will be used in that same state for the making of the cheese. Then another thing that's very important, and I'm afraid I'm not a microbiologist to give you better details or more details, but the way the milk is transformed into cheese can be done by using selected bacteria that will essentially take over any and all the bacteria that are already in the milk and replace it with powerful selected strains that would carry the transformation of the milk into cheese. This is not what happens with respect to Comté. Again, the idea is that the cheesemaker in the fruitière will do everything to respect the microflora of the milk and therefore not destroy it by a heavy-handed addition of other strains. So I hope this answers your question. If you, I'd be happy to provide more details if you're curious about the question of robots. But at this point, the robots are banned, and there is a requirement that has been discussed as an addition to the Comté PDO specifications, is that the farmers must draw the first milk by hand themselves, which I think is very important in maintaining the contact between the farmers and their animals, therefore their milk. Again, it is possible because typically a Comté herd is about 50 to 60 milking cows, so it's on a human size. If you are dealing with several hundred cows, certainly you have to adapt your practices with respect to milking.
Jean-Louis, I have another question.
Yeah.
A different subject, which I think is really interesting. And then we're going to move on to comparing the two cheeses with talking about the age and the taste and how they pair with the beverages. So this is from someone who's obviously spent a fair amount of time cutting cheese. She says, we receive large wheels and cut the nose of the wheel first. Is there a large difference of the middle of the cheese taste-wise versus the cheese towards the rind? Is it considered sweeter or more highly valued?
You know, it's a very good question. You know, in fact, I don't know if Monica could bring us back to the picture that shows, you know, a diagram with cutting cheese right here. So first of all, indeed, one does cut the nose first. Very often the first triangle, number 1 in the picture, is also split in half. You know, this is purely indicative, this diagram. It works in France and in the Jura especially, because each slice here is about 1 kilo of cheese. And here, you know, nobody can handle such a piece in a cheese counter. But nonetheless, many cheesemongers do start with quarter wheels, so they can be divided fairly easily into 20 pieces of a pound each, and then take it from there. But as to the question, you know, the difference in flavor is not so much maybe from the tip of the point to the heel. I would say it's simply wherever you are in the wheel, inside the wheel. As you get closer to the rind, the flavors evolve. And in fact, you know, some cheese lovers, and for some of you who were fortunate to meet Daphne Zeppos, she would make a big point of going as far as chewing on the crust, because the sense is that as you get closer, you know, and we can show this easily, as you get closer to the rind, and this part in particular, closer to the rind, that's a bit darker, the taste becomes more assertive. However, when it comes to whether the taste inside the number 1 corner is very different from the taste in the number 11 slice, it is less, I would say it's less striking and less of a factor.
Thank you, Jean-Louis. So we would love to know, I would love to know, because I've been sitting here while you've been talking, sort of alternately sniffing the cheeses, so I can get some sense of how the difference in aroma. So can we talk about how they differ?
Yes, of course.
Is there an age difference?
But you know, what would be very interesting for you, for all of you, you know, if you take your 2 slices and just smell the crusts on the two samples of Comté, you know, it's really quite different. Yeah. For me, I would say, that I find the crust on sample number 1 to carry a little bit more of animal aromas, a little
more barn.
A little bit more barn, exactly. A little bit more barn. Whereas I find the crust on sample 2 to be very clean and crisp. It's also the crust on number 2 is also a lighter color. It feels a little bit softer to me than the other crust. So that's one point in terms of just the contact we have with the cheese. As to the color of the cheese, I think I would say that number 2, it's hard to say. I find number 2 to be maybe a little bit yellower and number 1 a little bit whiter, but it's not a huge difference. I guess you understand that cheese that's whiter is probably a cheese that was made during the winter time when the cows eat hay, which does not contain carotene or very little, as opposed to fresh grass that contains a lot of carotene and therefore will bring a more yellow color to the finished cheese. Now, if we taste the 2 cheeses, of course, I have a bit of a leg up because I know what they are. So in fact, it'd be interesting to have a little bit more feedback from you before I tell you everything. I mean, I don't know that much, but a little bit. So if you have other comments, I'm very keen. Any comment?
Well, I can pass a couple along to you, Jean-Louis. Cynthia says that she's pairing her cheese with a Jura Pétillant by Genevat and an elderflower jelly that she made. And she says that's delicious. We also have a question from Marge asking if the milk composition of the different breeds influences the flavor of the cheese. So maybe I was actually curious about that as well. Can you talk a little bit about the why Montbéliard and Simmental cows?
Well, the question about the breeds is not that simple, quite honestly.
Okay.
First of all, what I must say, is that these 2 breeds, the Montbéliard and Simmental, are local breeds. So it's not arbitrary that we have these breeds in the Comté region. It would be more arbitrary to have Jersey cows. That's one thing. Secondly, the goal is to make cheese and meat, but primarily make cheese. So in order to make cheese, you need to have cows that don't produce too much milk. You want milk that has a good content of fat and protein. So, these 2 varieties, these 2 breeds give us that. Now, the question, again, it's not that simple a question. What you'll find, first of all, is that different appellations, if you look at Beaufort, they use these breeds, but I think they use others for other cheeses. You will see differences in the local breeds that are used. Now, this is one thing. If you want milk production, you're likely to take other kinds of cows, maybe Jersey, because they have been developed, or the breed has been developed to produce milk and nothing else. I mean, some of these cows have no value once all the milk has been squeezed out of them. And I hate to put it that way, but that's the reality. Whereas for the farmers in the Comté sector, the cow produces milk, but then the cow is sold for meat. And when you go to the region, you will see many stores and even local supermarkets, they buy meat from these farmers, and you see steaks from Montbéliard and so on. Another aspect that has to be underlined, and in fact, the Michaud brothers mention it, is that you want cows that are somewhat, he says rustic, but you want cows that are sturdy, that have very good feet, because they are in mountainous areas. For many of them are in areas that are wooded area or somewhat wooded areas and so on. So you need cows that are comfortable in that sort of a landscape, you know, as opposed to some other forms of milk production where the cows stay in a stable for the entire productive life. You know, cows in the Comté sector spend, you know, half the year or maybe more than half the year outside, depending on the weather. You know, they from I would say early April this year and maybe until late October, depending how the fall weather develops. But for all that time, they will be outside grazing. So they need to have a physical constitution that allows that. Now, you know, as to other breeds, you know, it's just it depends what the breed is used for, and also there's a lot of cross. How would you say of work that's done around each breed, depending on how it's going to be performing. I'm sorry, I probably was too long on the subject.
That's okay, Jean-Louis. We've got some tasting notes. John says that he feels that number 2 is actually spicier, not acidic. And then someone else wanted to know, are these 2 cheeses green or brown labeled? Also,
well, let's maybe, Suzanne, if you don't mind, let's take each question at a time, because otherwise I'll forget all of them.
Okay, well, one was just a comment
about the bands.
Yeah.
First of all, these are green band cheeses. We see very little of the brown band Comtés in the US. It doesn't represent a large amount of the production. And for the US, you know, affineurs typically ship green bands that are the most, I would say, the cheeses that look the best and that will be the best suited to the customers, maybe. But also keep in mind that affineurs typically select cheeses from specific or from certain fruitières that will be suitable to ship to the US, in the sense that a cheese that comes from France has a pretty long way ahead of it before it's in a before it is in a consumer's plate. You know, there is the shipping time, there is the time in warehouses at the importer's level, then they may go into a distributor's warehouse. So there's it's a lot of time really for cheese. So you need a cheese that's not going to mature during that time and lose some or break down during that period. So you need a cheese that's in good condition, that can continue to evolve a little bit, but that will be resistant to all these to the journey.
And we've got some other tasting notes as well, Jean-Louis. So
yeah, I see notes from Jason here.
Jason, so his Aroma notes are number 1, he's saying he's alas at work, so his beverage is water. Sorry, Jason. The paste is golden warm butter, soft dough, pasta, phyllo, vegetable stock, lightly roasted onions, garlic confit, and peanut. The rind has distinct notes of roasted peanut, roasted leeks, and sweet onion, mild wet mulch, and white mushroom. Peanutier, wheel the knife tried recently. And
excellent,
then
very interesting.
we have a couple notes from Carrie, who says she smells more barnyard on number 2, which she likes. She prefers the rind on number 1 because the molds are better developed, so the flavor near the rind is more desirable. A couple of people have also mentioned the crystals that seem to be in number 2.
Well, before we go to the crystal, I want to show you the cover of the book that we're giving away. And with this book, you know, it's you have a tool that's absolutely wonderful about what one smells, you know, and the range of smells that one encounters in a daily on a daily basis. I mean, for me, I should say that the cheese number 2 seemed to have much more of a lactic creme fraiche character. You know, one way to use the, what I find is that with the aromas wheel, what's interesting is that it is something that is, you know, it's like a tree in the sense that what you see at the core is 6 families of aromas. So it's a great place to start. You don't need to know all of the 83 aromas that have been associated with Comté. But when you start with this, let's say you find that, let's say like me, the number 2 cheese is a little bit lactic. By looking at the wheel, it helps you to figure out, okay, lactic, but how lactic? Is it lactic acid as I would find in yogurt? Is it lactic more a little bit rancid as in, you know? So this is a great tool. Similarly, if you find fruity notes, you can use your wheel to go deeper into the description. But yeah, other question on this or comments?
Let's see. Sarah says that the rinds, the crusts are a bit fragrant today. But she also says that her box hung outside overnight before being rescued, although I'm sure it would have been fine. Still cool and fine, she says. Number 2's rind has a very different appearance and smell on the top versus the bottom.
Well, first of all, what I should mention, it's for the tasting, is that the samples you have been freshly cut from 2 different wheels. So the cheese is as fresh as it can be on this side of the Jura region, you know, and that is very important because, as you know from what you do with cheese, after a small piece of cheese has been wrapped in plastic, you know, after a couple of days, the flavors are no longer fresh, are no longer what they should be. So that's something that we always want to consider, which requires very regular rewrapping, but truly the best remedy is to have more turnover. And this is one of the wonderful aspects, if you ever visit the Jura, is that Comté is consumed in large quantities. So whenever you buy it, it's a new wheel. It's always very, very fresh. And that's truly key to full appreciation of this cheese. Now, again, coming back to our 2 cheeses, if we have other comments or other ideas of pairings, if one thing you like better than the other.
I will say that Jason also said, Jean-Louis, that he liked that the samples that were sent were foil wrapped, paper wrapped, which I think does make a big difference. Can you tell us about the difference between the 2 of these? We are coming up on just 10 minutes left, so.
Sure. I mean, before I said that, I would just say that I thought the pairing with the sparkling wine from Ganva in the Jura is a great idea. I mean, sparkling wines go very well. I think fizzy beverages, you know, create a great contrast to the texture of Comté and other cheeses, but it's very refreshing. There's an almost cleansing element in sparkling beverages. But white wine is also a good, good element, again, because of good. It typically has good acidity, and we're looking at contrast and refreshing elements. Maybe in white wine you also find slightly nutty elements or a little bit of fruit, especially, you know, some freshness. That all goes well with Comté. Now, my notes on these 2 cheeses. So again, as I mentioned, the number 2 cheese is definitely, to me, I immediately thought of crème fraîche, and this sort of lactic element was very clear to me and confirmed on the palate when I chewed on it. It's firm. It has, I would say, medium intensity. The finish also is a bit on an acid and sweet note. I mean, it's a good Comté, but I would place this Comté as in around 12 months or so, maybe a year-old Comté. The other Comté, the number one Comté, to me, I mean, the first impression came from the crust and the slightly animal, barnyardy character of the crust, but maybe something that as I smelt the cheese, the taste of the cheese, I would define as a bit vegetal, a bit oniony. Again, classic aromas in Comtés. And on the palate, a cheese that I thought was quite intense, again with a bit of roasted onion, touch of leather in it. The paste is also quite firm. And altogether, a Comté, in my opinion, that seemed a bit more assertive than the other one. So the Comté number one is a Comté that's about a year and a half. These two Comtés come from different affinage cellars. Unfortunately, we rarely get information about the fruitière from which the Comtés come from, which in some ways would be an additional element, because I could show you on a map where these fruitières are, and typically there are differences in terroirs that are quite noticeable. I mean, many of the montane fruitières tend to have Comtés that have a lot of character. Question: what is fruitière? Very good question. I haven't done my job well.
Oh. Oh, before you answer Carrie's question, how old is Comté number two?
Oh, Comté number two. Okay, Comté number two is about a year old.
Okay.
About 12 months.
Okay, and a couple other things. Sorry, Carrie, we're going to make you wait just for a minute. A couple of other pairing ideas. Someone says they're enjoying a Texas Shiner Bock beer. They're in Texas, so that's what they had, and they like it because it brings out the nutty notes of the cheese. And someone else is looking to, Kendall is looking to try them with hard cider, which I think sounds really nice.
Yeah, it's a very good idea, hard cider.
Yep. Okay, now you can answer.
The question about fruitière. So the fruitière, the fruitière is the place where Comté is made. So it's also called a cooperative. These fruitières is where the transformation of milk into cheese takes place. Usually the fruitières are owned by the farmers in a cooperative arrangement. The name fruitière comes from an old French word, but essentially it means fructified. So the fruitière is the place where the milk is fructified by being made into cheese, which means that the milk, which is a highly perishable food, is turned into a big cheese with a long shelf life. So it really gives the milk a lot of added value. Also keep in mind that if you're a farmer, you cannot produce milk all year round. There's a period when the cow is dry, you don't have milk. So having these big wheels would allow farmers to have something to eat throughout winter in particular. Yes, another question?
We actually have some comments and some pairings. Liz says she's loving them both with hazelnuts for the flavor and texture. And another participant, another attendee loves them with Bell's Oberon wheat ale. And then there's Erica is enjoying the Comté with a cider from Texas called Keeper Ciders.
The cider, I think, is a very good idea. Fermented beverages like that, or even kombucha would be an interesting combination.
Yep, absolutely.
But another thing is that when you taste Comté, you've probably noticed that the temperature plays a big part. When it's cold, you don't really get the flavors, and if it gets too warm, you will lose a lot of the nuances. The idea of serving nuts with Comté is a wonderful idea. Hazelnut or walnut, it really adds something to the cheese. There's a very good, and the cheese adds a lot to the nuts as well.
Let's see, it looks like we have a question. Oh, number 2 is pretty yummy with dark chocolate from my trail mix.
That's a good idea. If you want to send some of that my way.
So Jean-Louis, if people want to connect with you, because we are at, this has been amazing. You've been fascinating to listen to. I could listen to you talk about this stuff all day. We're at 4:55, so we just got a little time and we have to do our raffle. If people want to reach out and get in touch and find out more information, how can they do that?
Well, the best way is to reach us through our website at conte-usa.com.
Great.
You know, and feel free. No question is a bad question. You know, all questions are welcome. And you know, and I think you can see this is a Comté is a cheese that inspires a lot of passion, and not only it for me, but this is something that I appreciate a lot among the cheesemongers and cheese community here, where people are so well regarded, and everybody gets quite excited about Comté and what it represents.
It's wonderful. And just as an aside, in the innovation issue of culture, if anyone has that hanging around, our One Cheese, 5 Ways feature is all about Comté. So there are 5 great recipes, and on the website as well, you can find some terrific recipes. People are adding more pairings. Caramelized walnuts and Granny Smith apple. Sounds amazing. Carrie is enjoying the cheese with kale, farro, and a white Slovenian wine called Helozan.
Wonderful. Yeah, good idea. I mean, Slovenian wines are quite the thing these days, I have to say.
Yes, good. Well, thank you, everybody. So we're going to spin the wheel of names here in a minute and find out who is going to win Harold McGee's book. So let's see, who's our winner? Okay. Susan Parenti is our winner. Congratulations, Susan. You win this marvelous book. And if there are any we have just a couple more minutes for some last minute questions or some last minute comments for Jean-Louis. Okay, one new message, here we go. Pear cider. Oh, people are asking where you can get the book. It was just released in October, Kimberly, so I believe you can get it on Amazon.
Or in an independent bookstore near you.
Yes, exactly. Perfect, Jean-Louis. We have several people saying, merci, Jean-Louis.
You're very welcome.
As well. And this has been so wonderful. I've learned so much and really appreciate the time and effort you put in. So somebody else is recommending Arcadia Sparkling Blueberry Wine, which of course we're in Maine. So what more perfect than that? So
yeah, I mean, you know, fruit, I mean, I like the combination with blueberry is an interesting fruit because it has good acidity, it has fruit, but it also has, you know, there's more than just flavor. And I think it adds crispness, you know, to the cheese. And sometimes there are notes in the cheese that will really work well with this sort of fruit. Yeah.
Yeah, and blueberry, we're very partial to our wild blueberries here in Maine because, you know, they're not a big sugar bomb. They're actually quite tart. So there's some really terrific wines, including a sparkling wine made with blueberries called Bluette that is not sweet at all. You would never know. So, well, I think we're at time now. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this fabulous virtual counterculture on Comté. And thank you, Jean-Louis, for your just your wealth of information. I'm seeing lots of thank yous coming in, and it's been so much fun to be with you all this afternoon. And all of you people out there in the cheese world, I look forward to when I can finally travel and meet you all in person.
I was going to say the same thing. I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible, you know, later in the year, next year.
Yes.
Thanks again.
Sometime soon. Thank you all very, very much for being with us this afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.